The icebox diet, picture this. It's 1910. You walk into your kitchen, and instead of a sleek stainless steel fridge with an ice dispenser that plays soft jazz, okay, maybe not the jazz, you've got a literal box of ice. A big wooden cabinet with a chunk of frozen lake wedged inside, melting its way into a bucket you have to empty before it smells like a medieval moat. Back then, refrigeration wasn't set it and forget it. It was more like set it and then get up every day at dawn to deal with it before your milk curdles into a biohazard. And speaking of milk, you didn't buy it in neat cartons. It showed up in glass bottles on your doorstep, vulnerable to weather, neighborhood cats, and occasionally drunk neighbors. Here's the simpler part. People had way less choice in what they could store. If you wanted to eat, you worked with what you had. No panic at 2 a.m. over whether your oat milk is expired. No freezer hoarding of 30 pizzas just in case. You lived within the limits of your literal melting block of ice. But the science side? Cold slows down bacterial growth. So even the primitive icebox was an upgrade from, well, leaving meat out on the counter like an ancient buffet for germs. Still, it meant daily vigilance. Modern fridges do all that work invisibly, and they don't involve negotiating with a grumpy ice delivery guy who just dropped a 100-pound cube on your front step. Basically, life was simpler because you didn't have time to be indecisive. Your food either got eaten or it evolved into penicillin without your permission. When spam was just meat today, if you say spam, people think of shady emails promising business opportunities from a prince you've never met. But back then, spam was lunch, dinner, emergency road trip fuel. It was a can of pink, salty mystery meat that could sit in your cupboard until the sun exploded and still be good. Spam took off in the 1930s, and especially during World War II, when it was shipped worldwide to soldiers. No refrigeration needed, just a can, a key to open it, and the willingness to ignore questions like, what animal is this? Or why is it so shiny? Nutritionally, it was survival food. Protein, fat, salt, and enough preservatives to embalm a small raccoon. Psychologically, it was comfort, a consistent taste in a world where fresh meat wasn't always available. And unlike modern spam in your inbox, this spam was welcomed. People got creative. Spam sandwiches, spam fried rice, spam baked into casseroles. It was the duct tape of the culinary world. The simplicity here? You didn't need 1,000 food apps or delivery options. You had a can opener, a frying pan, and one ingredient. It was dinner in 5 minutes. No scrolling, no agonizing over takeout menus, just accept the spam. Basically, life was simpler because your meal planning was about using what you had, not navigating a digital jungle of too many choices, suspicious delivery fees, and disappointment when your fries arrive cold. Directions were an extreme sport. Imagine trying to get somewhere without GPS. No soothing robot voice saying, recalculating when you miss a turn. No instant satellite view of that shady shortcut. Just a paper map the size of a tablecloth and the vague hope that you could refold it without summoning demons. Back then, asking for directions was normal. You'd pull over, roll down your window, and hope the stranger you approached didn't send you just past the old mill. A landmark you've never seen because it burned down 40 years ago. And if you got lost, you stayed lost until you stumbled upon something familiar, or the sun went down and you started questioning your life choices. Scientifically speaking, this kind of navigation actually engaged your hippocampus, the brain area that helps with spatial memory. People literally exercise their sense of direction daily, which is why your grandparents can still remember the exact route to the beach they took once in 1956. The simpler part wasn't that travel was easier, it wasn't. But your focus was on the road, not juggling Spotify playlists, group chats, and whether the AI voice sounds judgmental when you ignore it. Basically, life was simpler because you weren't outsourcing your sense of direction to a glowing rectangle. You were the glowing rectangle. Entertainment wasn't endless. Once upon a time, binge watching meant you sat through 2 TV episodes in a row, if you were lucky enough to catch the rerun right after the original. TV didn't stream, it didn't pause, and if you missed your favorite show, that was it. No second chances unless you knew someone with a VHS recorder the size of a small car. You had a few channels, You learned their schedules by heart. You planned your entire evening around catching a new episode. Or you just accepted that you'd never know what happened until your friends told you at school the next day. Probably wrong. There was a weird magic in that scarcity. Shows were events. People gathered in living rooms at the same time, watching the same thing. No algorithms feeding you endless next episodes until you realize it's 3 a.m. and you've forgotten how to blink. From a psychological perspective, this scarcity created anticipation, which can be more rewarding than the thing itself. Modern dopamine hits come instantly, which is why old-school TV watchers had superhuman patience. And no, they didn't develop choice paralysis from scrolling Netflix for 45 minutes before giving up and watching a cooking show about bread they'll never make. Basically, life was simpler because when the show ended, so did your watching. You didn't lose 3 days of your life to adjust one more spiral. Shopping was a physical workout. Back then, shopping cart wasn't a button. It was a literal squeaky metal basket on wheels that you pushed through a store while avoiding the judgmental eyes of the cashier who knew exactly how many cookies you were buying. You couldn't just order something at midnight while lying in bed, half conscious. If you wanted new shoes, you got dressed, went outside and physically hunted for them like a predator in the wild. And if the store didn't have your size, you didn't rage tweet. You just accepted that your feet and fate were incompatible this season. This was retail therapy in the most literal sense. You burned calories walking aisles, lifting bags, and avoiding small talk with overly enthusiastic store clerks. There was no buy now, pay later. It was buy now, carry it home yourself, hope you have bus fare. Economically, this meant people bought less impulsively. No flash sales, no push notifications. Just the pure thrill of finding what you needed, or compromising because the store only had 2 options. Basically, life was simpler because shopping was an event, not a reflex. And your delivery guy wasn't quietly judging your 10th package this week. Phone calls were mini heart attacks. Once upon a time when your phone rang, you didn't know who it was. No caller ID, no preview text, just a shrill, obnoxious ringing that could mean anything: a friend, a telemarketer, or a wrong number from a grandma who thinks you're Mabel. Answering the phone was a gamble. You had to commit. And if you missed it, no voicemail, or at best, a tape-based answering machine that your whole family could hear. It was mystery communication at its finest. From a psychological angle, this kept people more socially engaged, but also more adaptable. You learned to think on your feet, because when you picked up, you had to figure out instantly who you were talking to. There was no texting to buy yourself time or screen calls for emotional readiness. And forget constant notifications. If you wanted to talk to someone, you called during reasonable hours. You didn't get random work messages at 11 p.m. unless it was a true emergency. Basically, life was simpler because every phone ring was a surprise. Sometimes a good one, sometimes pure chaos. But either way, you actually answered. Maps were paper, not apps. If you wanted to get somewhere new, you didn't whip out your phone and let a polite robot voice guide you turn by turn. No, you unfolded a paper map the size of your entire windshield, squinted at it, and tried to match it to the real world without dying in traffic. Road trips involved co-pilots, actual human beings whose sole job was to read that map and say things like, "I think we missed the exit, 10 minutes too late." And if you were alone, you'd pull over at a gas station and ask a stranger for directions, hoping they didn't just point vaguely and say, "It's that way." Psychologically, this gave people better spatial awareness and memory. You actually learned where things were because you couldn't rely on a constant GPS feed. You had to visualize routes, remember landmarks, and keep your bearings, skills modern brains have outsourced to an app that occasionally drops you in a cornfield for no reason. Basically, life was simpler because finding your way was an adventure, not a passive background task. Though yes, you occasionally ended up 30 miles off course and questioning your life choices. Photos were rare and real. There was a time when taking a photo was a commitment. You didn't snap 47 selfies and delete 46 of them. You had a roll of film with maybe 24 exposures, and every click mattered. You couldn't see the result instantly. You waited days, sometimes weeks, to get your photos developed. And when you finally picked them up, surprise, half were blurry, someone's eyes were closed, and there was always one accidental close-up of your own thumb. But here's the thing, those imperfect photos meant more. They were physical. You could hold them, stick them in albums, or hand them to someone without airdropping. Psychologically, the scarcity made them precious. You captured moments, not endless angles of the same latte, and no filters. If your skin looked good in a photo, it was because of lighting, not vintage Valencia number 2. Basically, life was simpler because your camera roll wasn't a digital landfill. It was a small, cherished collection of real-life snapshots, flaws and all. News didn't chase you. There was no doom scrolling, no push notifications buzzing every time someone sneezed in politics. If you wanted news, you sought it out. Morning paper, evening TV broadcast, maybe a neighbor gossiping over the fence. The pace was slower, which meant you had time to process events before the next crisis broke. Psychologically, this reduced anxiety because you weren't living in a 24/7 feed of potential disasters. News was something you checked on purpose, not something that followed you into the bathroom. Sure, it meant you might not hear about every global incident the second it happened, but you also didn't know what some celebrity had for breakfast unless you truly cared enough to find out. Basically, life was simpler because the news stayed in its lane, and your brain wasn't constantly toggling between buy milk and existential dread about world events. Phones stayed at home. Once upon a time, if you left your house, people just couldn't reach you. Your phone was a heavy plastic brick attached to the wall by a cord, and that cord was basically a leash that limited your pacing range to about 6 feet. If you weren't home, callers would either try again later or leave a message on your answering machine, which you'd check when you felt like it, not when a notification bossed you into it. Psychologically, this meant you had genuine breaks from communication. Your brain wasn't on high alert for texts, pings, and urgent work emails at all hours. If you were out with friends, you were really out with friends. No splitting attention between the table conversation and Instagram. Basically, life was simpler because you could vanish for a while without anyone assuming you'd been kidnapped. Shopping was an event. If you wanted something, you physically went to a store. You touched it, tried it, compared it with other options in person. And if they didn't have it in your size or color, tough luck. You'd either make do or wait for the next shipment. This made purchases more deliberate. You weren't impulse buying random gadgets at 2 a.m. in bed just because a TikTok told you they were life-changing. There was friction, and that friction saved your wallet from the slow bleed of online checkout buttons. Plus, mall trips were social. You'd go with friends, wander aimlessly, get pretzels, maybe try on ridiculous clothes just for fun. It was an outing, not a scrolling session. Basically, life was simpler because shopping was about the experience, not just the transaction, and your porch wasn't buried under a mountain of cardboard boxes. Entertainment was shared. If a TV show came on at 8 p.m., you watched it at 8 p.m., or you missed it. There was no pausing, no binging, no "I'll get to it eventually." This meant entire neighborhoods could be watching the same thing at the same time, then talking about it the next day. It gave people a sense of shared culture. You weren't all in separate algorithm bubbles. You were laughing, gasping, and shouting at the same cliffhanger together. Psychologically, this created stronger social bonds. Anticipation built over a week, not a night. And you didn't feel the pressure to speedrun a season just to avoid spoilers from your cousin's group chat. Basically, life was simpler because entertainment wasn't an infinite buffet. It was a weekly ritual that everyone got to savor together. Vacations were real escapes. Back then, when you went on vacation, you actually went on vacation. Your boss couldn't email you a quick question at the beach because there was no Wi-Fi, no desperate tether to the office. If you wanted to send someone a photo, you'd have to finish the roll of film, get it developed, and mail it. By the time the picture arrived, you were already home with a sunburn and a fridge magnet souvenir. Psychologically, that distance gave your brain actual rest. You weren't half in relax mode and half in, oh God, I forgot to reply to Steve mode. The world kept turning without you, and no one expected you to respond instantly. Basically, life was simpler because you could truly disappear for a week, and no one thought it was weird. Letters felt like treasure. Getting a letter in the mail was an event. You'd hold the envelope, see the handwriting, and wonder what was inside. Opening it was like unwrapping a present, even if it was just your aunt describing her new curtains. Letters took time to write and send, which made them feel deliberate. People thought about what they wanted to say instead of firing off half-formed texts that autocorrect mangled into cryptic nonsense. Psychologically, this created stronger emotional weight. A letter was proof someone took time out of their day, found a pen, and committed words to paper just for you. Basically, life was simpler because communication wasn't disposable. It was a keepsake. News came once a day. Once upon a time, you got the news from a morning paper or the evening broadcast. That was it. No endless feed of breaking updates, no doom scrolling until 2 a.m., no constant ping of urgent alerts that turned out to be celebrity gossip. This meant your brain had space to process events before the next flood of information arrived. You weren't being trained to refresh for the next hit of outrage or anxiety. And when something major happened, it was actually major, not just mildly interesting content packaged as an emergency. Basically, life was simpler because you weren't drowning in a 24/7 hurricane of headlines. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.